My husband publicly mocked my grandmother's old junk at our anniversary dinner, calling it worthless clutter taking up space in our home. 8 months later, that same worthless painting sold for $1.2 million at Sotheby's while he watched from the audience, his face pale with shock. He never knew I'd been consulting with art experts all along, or that the family heirloom he'd tried to throw away was a lost masterpiece by a renowned artist. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The polished oak floors of the Westbrook Gallery's main exhibition hall gleamed under the carefully positioned spotlights. Attendees in cocktail attire circulated through the space, wine glasses in hand, murmuring appreciatively at the newly unveiled collection. My painting, my grandmother's painting, commanded the central wall, its vibrant colors seeming to pulse with life under the perfect lighting. "Miss Chadwick, the curator is asking if you'd say a few words at the podium," whispered Melissa, my art consultant and now friend, appearing at my elbow in a sleek black dress. I nodded, smoothing the silk of my deep burgundy gown, a carefully chosen statement piece that walked the line between elegant and memorable. In this room full of collectors and critics, being forgettable was not an option. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and notification bell. We share new inspirational journeys every week that you won't want to miss. As I made my way toward the small platform at the end of the hall, I caught sight of a familiar figure near the entrance. James. My ex-husband stood rigid in his typical charcoal suit, expression frozen somewhere between disbelief and dismay. Our eyes met briefly before I deliberately turned away, focusing instead on the journey that had brought me here. Exactly 1 year earlier, we had been hosting our 10th anniversary dinner at our suburban home. James had insisted on inviting his colleagues from the investment firm, always networking, always performing. I'd spent days preparing our house, cooking, and ensuring everything would impress his associates. "And this is my wife, Olivia." James's voice carried that particular tone he reserved for public appearances, warm on the surface with an undercurrent of control. His arm circled my waist in what guests would interpret as affection, but I recognized as possession. "She keeps our home looking beautiful, don't you, darling?" I smiled the smile I'd perfected over the years, the one that reached my eyes just enough to seem genuine without revealing anything authentic behind it. A professional smile, though James would never recognize it as such. "James tells us you're quite the collector," said Martin Green, one of the senior partners at James's firm. Before I could respond, James laughed. "Oh, that's a generous interpretation. Olivia has a habit of holding on to family junk. Her grandmother was some kind of painter or hobbyist, and Olivia can't bear to part with any of it." "My grandmother was an artist," I corrected quietly. "The painting in our living room was her work." "Speaking of which," James continued as if I hadn't spoken, steering the conversation back to himself, "I was telling Martin about our plans to renovate the living room this spring. That wall space could really showcase some proper art." Martin's wife caught my eye with a sympathetic glance as James led the guests into the living room, where my grandmother's painting hung above the fireplace. It was a large canvas, nearly 4 feet wide, depicting a vibrant street scene with abstract elements and distinctive brushwork. "This is what I'm talking about," James gestured dismissively. "Olivia's grandmother painted this thing. It's been collecting dust in Olivia's family for decades." "It's actually quite striking," Martin's wife commented, studying the canvas with interest. "The technique reminds me of the early modernists." James chuckled indulgently. "That's very kind of you, Rebecca. But between us, I've been trying to convince Olivia to let it go for years. We could use a proper piece from a known artist in this space." "My grandmother studied in Paris in the 1950s, I said, something in Rebecca's genuine interest giving me courage. "She exhibited under a pseudonym because women artists weren't taken seriously then." "Hobby painters and their delusions of grandeur," James said with another laugh, louder this time. Olivia's family has constructed quite the mythology around Grandma's dabbling. Next thing, she'll tell you it's worth a fortune. The guests smiled uncomfortably while James continued. I work with actual valuable assets every day. Trust me, I know the difference between investment-grade art and sentimental family clutter. That night, after the guests had gone and James had retired to his study with a scotch, I stood alone before my grandmother's painting. Eleanor Kingston, my mother's mother, had been a formidable woman who spoke rarely of her past. She had died when I was 15, leaving behind a collection of paintings and a mysterious wooden box of documents and photographs I'd never fully explored. It's not junk, I whispered to the canvas, tracing the distinctive signature in the corner, EK, followed by what looked like another initial that had been deliberately obscured. Something in James's dismissal, the absolute certainty with which he devalued not just the painting but my grandmother's entire life's work, awoke a quiet determination in me. The next morning, while James was at his weekly golf game, I retrieved the wooden box from our attic storage. Inside, beneath stacks of old photographs and letters, I found a small leather journal written in French and several exhibition programs from galleries in Paris. The name that appeared repeatedly wasn't Eleanor Kingston, but Elise Karsner, a name I'd never heard before. Most intriguing was a faded photograph of my grandmother standing beside a distinguished-looking man in front of a gallery, both smiling at the camera. On the back was written, "With J.A. after the successful exhibition, Montmartre, 1956. 2 weeks later, while James was on a business trip to Chicago, I contacted Rebecca Martin, who had shown such interest in the painting. Her response came within hours. Olivia, I didn't want to say too much at your dinner party, but I'm an art history professor specializing in mid-century modernism. Your grandmother's work caught my eye immediately. The technique is distinctive, and if it's authentic to the period, it could be significant. Would you allow me to examine it more closely with a colleague?" That examination led to another, and then another. Each expert became more excited than the last, speaking in hushed, reverent tones about brushwork, composition, and historical context. Names were mentioned that I had to Google: influential art movements, famous contemporaries, and prestigious galleries. Most incredibly, the partially obscured signature began to make sense. What followed EK wasn't another initial, but the beginning of Arsner, carefully painted to be nearly invisible unless you knew to look for it. My grandmother had created a subtle dual signature that preserved her connection to her work while concealing her full identity. All this I discovered while maintaining my role as James's perfect wife. I smiled at his jokes about Grandma's masterpiece and nodded when he discussed replacing it during the renovation. Meanwhile, I was meeting with art authenticators, historians, and eventually gallery curators, all arranged through Rebecca, who had become both mentor and friend. Your grandmother wasn't just any artist, Rebecca explained over coffee one afternoon, her voice vibrating with excitement. We believe she was Elise Karsner, who exhibited briefly but brilliantly in Paris before disappearing from the art world, sometime around 1958. Her work has been sought after for decades, with only a handful of authenticated pieces in existence. Most assumed she had died young or stopped painting, but it appears she simply changed her life. What James saw as worthless clutter was potentially a significant discovery in the art world, and possibly worth more than our house. But I kept this knowledge carefully hidden, unsure what to do with it, until James made the decision for me. 3 months after the anniversary dinner, James and I were having breakfast when he dropped a glossy brochure beside my coffee cup. "I've scheduled the contractors to start the renovation next month," he announced, not looking up from his phone. "They'll need 2 weeks minimum, so we should plan to stay at the Mayfield Hotel during the worst of it." I glanced at the brochure, a high-end interior design firm specializing in curated environments for discerning clients. The sample photos showed stark, minimalist spaces with carefully positioned contemporary art pieces. "What about my grandmother's painting?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. James sighed, finally setting down his phone. "Olivia, we've discussed this. That painting doesn't fit the aesthetic we're going for. It's time to let it go. It has sentimental value," I said carefully. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Sentiment doesn't match Italian leather and brushed steel," he replied with a dismissive wave. "Besides, your grandmother has been gone for what, 20 years? If the painting was worth anything, someone would have recognized it by now." The irony of his statement nearly made me laugh. In the weeks since Rebecca's initial assessment, I had quietly connected with 3 different art experts, all of whom had become increasingly excited about the possibility that my grandmother was indeed the mysterious Elise Karsner. "What if I move it to my study?" I suggested. My small home office was the one room James rarely entered. "We're redoing that space too," he countered. "It's becoming my podcast studio, remember? For my new financial advice series, of course." James's latest attempt to position himself as a thought leader in investment strategies, a project he'd mentioned once, months ago, that had apparently become a definite plan without further discussion. "I haven't decided what to do with it yet," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "I'll figure something out before the renovations start." If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. We put a lot of effort into these videos, and your support means everything to us. After James left for work, I called Rebecca immediately. Her response was swift and decisive. "Bring it to my university office today. I can secure it in our climate-controlled storage facility until we determine next steps." Within hours, the painting was carefully wrapped and transported to the university's art department, where Rebecca introduced me to Dr. Marcus Chen, a conservation specialist who had been eagerly waiting to examine the work up close. "The technique is unmistakable," Dr. Chen murmured, examining the canvas under specialized lighting. "This layering method was Karsner's signature approach, building depth through translucent applications rather than opaque coverage." He pointed to an area near the bottom corner. "And see this particular brushwork? This matches documented Karsner pieces exactly." "So it's authentic?" I asked, my heart pounding. "We'll need to run technical analyses to be absolutely certain," Rebecca explained. "Pigment dating, canvas fiber testing, provenance research, but everything we're seeing supports our theory." For the first time, Dr. Chen raised his eyes from the canvas to look at me. "Ms. Chadwick, if this is indeed an authenticated Elise Karsner, it's a significant find. Her work is extremely rare and highly sought after. The last Karsner that came to auction sold for over $800,000. The figure stunned me into silence. "Olivia," Rebecca said gently, "do you have other paintings by your grandmother? Any documentation of her work?" "Yes," I managed. "Several more canvases in storage at my mother's house, and that box of documents I mentioned. We should examine everything," Dr. Chen said, excitement coloring his typically professional tone. "This could be much bigger than a single painting." That evening, I sat alone in our living room, staring at the empty space above the fireplace, where my grandmother's painting had hung. The wall looked barren, almost wounded by the absence. James wouldn't notice for days. He rarely looked at the painting when it was there, so why would he notice its absence? I had a decision to make. I could tell James the truth, that his worthless family clutter might be worth more than his annual bonus, that the grandmother he'd dismissed as a hobby painter might in fact be a significant artist whose work was sought by collectors worldwide, but something held me back. Perhaps it was the memory of his laughter at the dinner party, the casual cruelty with which he'd dismissed not just the painting, but my entire family's history. Or perhaps it was something deeper, the realization that this discovery was mine. Alone, the first thing in our marriage that existed completely outside his control or influence. When James returned home that evening, he didn't notice the missing painting, nor did he notice the next day, or the day after. A week passed, and the empty wall remained unremarked upon, a silent testimony to how little attention he paid to things that mattered to me. During that week, I retrieved the additional paintings from my mother's storage, 5 more canvases of varying sizes, all signed with the same partial E.K. Arsner signature when you knew where to look. I also gathered every document from my grandmother's box, organizing them chronologically with Rebecca's help. The story that emerged was fascinating. Eleanor Kingston had indeed been Elise Karsner, a promising young American artist who had studied in Paris in the early 1950s. She had exhibited alongside now famous contemporaries, developing a distinctive style that combined structural elements of Cubism with the emotional expressiveness of abstract expressionism. Then, inexplicably, she had disappeared from the art world around 1958. The documents revealed why. She had fallen in love with my grandfather, Thomas Kingston, an American businessman whose conservative family would never have accepted a bohemian artist as his wife. To marry him, she had abandoned her artistic identity, changing her professional name and largely ceasing to exhibit her work. But she hadn't stopped painting. The canvases we recovered showed an artistic evolution spanning decades. Work created, in private, signed with her subtle dual identity, preserved by a woman who knew their value even if the world did not. "Your grandmother was extraordinary," Rebecca said as we cataloged the collection. "She maintained her artistic integrity while adapting to the constraints of her time." These later works show tremendous growth. They're perhaps even more sophisticated than her Paris period. I found myself wondering what Eleanor, Elise, had felt during those years. Had she resented giving up her public identity? Had my grandfather understood what she sacrificed? Had anyone in the family recognized the significance of what hung on their walls? 2 weeks into this journey of discovery, James finally noticed the missing painting. "Did you already get rid of that old thing?" he asked casually as we prepared for bed, nodding toward the empty wall. "It's in storage," I replied. "Truthfully, if incompletely." "Good." He nodded approvingly. "The designers will be pleased. They're bringing in a conceptual piece by that new artist everyone's talking about. Delaney or Della Rosa, something like that. Very cutting edge." I said nothing, letting him assume my silence was agreement. The technical analyses confirmed what the experts had already suspected. The pigments, canvas, and techniques all aligned perfectly with Karsner's known works. The provenance research completed the picture. Exhibition records from Paris galleries showed works with titles and dimensions matching my grandmother's paintings. "We have enough to approach major galleries and auction houses," Rebecca advised during a private meeting in her office. The discovery of 6 previously unknown works by Elise Karsner represents a significant art world event. The question is, what do you want to do with them? It was a question I hadn't fully considered. These paintings represented not just potential wealth, but my family's legacy. A grandmother whose true identity and talent had been subsumed, hidden away to accommodate others' expectations. "I want them to be seen," I said finally. "I want my grandmother's work recognized for what it is, but I'm not ready for James to know yet." Rebecca nodded understandingly. "We can be discreet in our initial approaches. Use my name rather than yours for preliminary discussions with galleries." And so began my double life. While James focused on his work and his podcast studio plans, I met with gallery directors, museum curators, and art historians, all fascinated by the discovery of these lost Karsner works. I arranged these meetings during lunch hours, claiming dental appointments or shopping trips. I used my maiden name in communications, created a separate email account, and paid for art appraisal services from a private account James knew nothing about. Throughout this period, James continued making comments about finally clearing out the old junk, and upgrading to real art. Each dismissive remark strengthened my resolve to proceed carefully and independently. This discovery was mine to manage, the one area of my life where James's opinions and judgments held no sway. By the time the renovation contractors arrived, I had made my decision. Westbrook Gallery, known for its thoughtful retrospectives of overlooked mid-century artists, had offered to host an exhibition. Elise Karsner, The Hidden Years. The director, Catherine Westbrook herself, had been almost reverential when viewing the collection. "These works rewrite our understanding of Karsner's development as an artist," she had said. "The world needs to see them." I agreed, but on one condition: the exhibition would be prepared in complete confidentiality, with my identity as the painting's owner protected until opening night. Catherine, intrigued by the unusual request, had agreed. What I didn't yet know was that events in my personal life were about to accelerate my plans in ways I couldn't have anticipated. The renovation of our home proceeded with the methodical precision typical of James's projects. Contractors arrived daily at exactly 8 a.m., transforming our living spaces according to the designer's stark vision, while I retreated to the guest house in our backyard. James remained largely absent, engrossed in a high-profile acquisition his firm was managing, returning home late and leaving before dawn. In his rare appearances, he spoke enthusiastically about the transformation, the custom Italian furniture being shipped, the state-of-the-art audio setup for his podcast studio, the commissioned artwork that would finally give our home some cultural credibility. The designer asked about any remaining personal items in the main house, he mentioned one evening, barely looking up from his laptop. "Apparently, there's still some old artwork in the basement storage. They need everything cleared out for the final phase." My heart skipped. The basement held two of my grandmother's smaller works that I hadn't yet moved to the university storage facility, paintings I'd kept as personal favorites rather than including in the gallery exhibition plans. "I'll take care of it tomorrow," I assured him, making a mental note to retrieve them first thing in the morning. "No need," James replied, still typing. "I told them to dispose of anything still there. They'll handle it." I froze. "You what?" "It's just old junk, Olivia," he sighed, finally looking up. "This renovation is about moving forward, not clinging to the past. The designers know what they're doing." I was already pulling on a sweater, heading for the door. "Those are my family's things. You had no right—" "It's after 10 p.m., James called after me, annoyance edging his voice. "The crew is gone. Whatever's there can wait until tomorrow." But I was already outside, crossing our manicured lawn toward the main house, fumbling with keys in the darkness. The basement lights flickered on to reveal stacks of labeled boxes by the service entrance. "Disposal," written in bold marker across their sides. I tore through them frantically, relief washing over me when I found the smaller paintings wedged between layers of bubble wrap. They were safe, but James's casual disregard for my property, my heritage, crystallized something I'd been feeling for months. Our marriage had become a space where my history, my preferences, my very identity were secondary considerations, easily overridden by his vision of how things should be. Quick reminder to hit that subscribe button if you're enjoying this journey. Your support means we can keep bringing you these real-life stories of resilience and triumph. The next morning, I quietly loaded the recovered paintings into my car and drove them to Rebecca's office. She was meeting with Dr. Chen when I arrived, both of them surrounded by documents and digital images of my grandmother's work. "Olivia," Rebecca greeted me, concern evident in her expression. "Is everything all right? You look upset." I explained what had happened, the words tumbling out with unexpected emotion. He was going to throw them away, without even asking me. Dr. Chen helped me unwrap the paintings, his expert hands checking for any damage. "These are in perfect condition," he assured me, "and they're significant works, especially this one." He gestured to the smaller canvas, an intimate portrait of a Parisian café scene. The brushwork here shows clear lineage to her earlier period, but with the emotional maturity of her later years. Rebecca guided me to a chair. "Olivia, we've been doing extensive research on your grandmother. Each discovery makes us more certain that this exhibition will be significant, not just personally for your family, but for art history." She hesitated. "The auction house estimates have come in. They're substantial." "How substantial?" I asked. She showed me the preliminary assessment. Conservative estimates valued the collection at $3.8 million, with the largest painting, the one that had hung above our fireplace, potentially reaching $1.2 million alone. The figures seemed unreal, disconnected from the paintings I'd grown up seeing in family homes, the works James had so casually dismissed as worthless. "Does your husband know about any of this yet?" Dr. Chen asked gently. I shook my head. "No. And I'm not sure I want him, to." As I drove home, I wrestled with complicated emotions. The validation of my grandmother's talent was deeply satisfying, but it highlighted the painful reality of my marriage, a relationship where James had never truly seen me or valued what mattered to me. The thought of sharing this discovery with him now felt not like a triumph, but like a concession, as though I needed his recognition to validate what I already knew was true. While my secret project with the gallery gained momentum, James's professional life hit unexpected turbulence. The high-profile acquisition his firm had been managing collapsed spectacularly amid allegations of financial impropriety. Though James wasn't directly implicated, his position as lead advisor put him squarely in the fallout zone. "It's a temporary setback," he insisted during a rare dinner at home, his confidence firmly in place despite the shadows under his eyes. "These things happen. The market overreacts, then corrects itself." I nodded sympathetically, playing the supportive wife role I'd perfected over the years. But privately, I noticed the increasing frequency of hushed phone calls, the growing tension in his shoulders, the way he checked stock prices obsessively throughout the day. "The renovation is nearly complete," he announced, abruptly changing the subject. "The designer wants us to do a final walkthrough next week. The new artwork is being installed tomorrow." I made appropriate noises of interest while my mind drifted to the Westbrook Gallery, where Catherine and her team were carefully positioning my grandmother's paintings for the upcoming exhibition. The show was scheduled to open in just 6 weeks, the invitations already printed with "The Lost Works of Elise Karsner" embossed in elegant script. Two parallel worlds, neither aware of the other's true nature. James's professional crisis deepened over the next week. The firm placed him on administrative leave pending review, corporate speak for "we're deciding whether to fire you." His carefully cultivated network of industry contacts suddenly became unavailable, lunch meetings canceled, calls unreturned. "It's all politics," he insisted, pacing our newly renovated living room where a large, aggressively modern canvas now dominated the wall where my grandmother's painting had hung. "Thornfield needs a scapegoat, and I'm convenient. Once the dust settles, they'll realize they need me." I murmured agreement while noting the changes in our dynamic. For the first time in our marriage, James was vulnerable, his carefully constructed persona of success and control beginning to crack. For the first time, he needed my emotional support more than I needed his approval. Meanwhile, the preparations for my grandmother's exhibition continued flawlessly. Catherine Westbrook had secured coverage from major art publications and arranged for several important collectors to attend the opening. The exhibition catalog was being printed, featuring scholarly essays contextualizing Elise Karsner's work within the mid-century art movement. "We've had inquiries from 3 museums already," Rebecca told me during our weekly update meeting. "The curator from the Whitney is particularly interested in the possibility of including your grandmother in their upcoming retrospective on women artists of the period." The parallel tracks of our lives continued, intersecting only in the most superficial ways. James, preoccupied with salvaging his career, barely noticed my increasing absences or the quiet confidence that had begun to replace my habitual deference. When I mentioned a ladies' lunch or shopping with friends, he nodded distractedly, relieved perhaps to have the house to himself for his endless crisis management calls. The firm's annual gala is next weekend, he mentioned one morning, the first time he'd shown interest in our social calendar in weeks. I need to make an appearance, show everyone I'm unfazed by this temporary situation. Of course, I agreed. I'll find something to wear. What I didn't tell him was that the gala fell on the same evening as the VIP preview for my grandmother's exhibition. For the first time, I would need to choose between maintaining the supportive wife facade and witnessing the public recognition of my grandmother's legacy. It wasn't really a choice at all. 3 days before both events, James received the call I'd been expecting for weeks. His administrative leave had become permanent separation. The firm had decided to move in a different direction, offering a severance package contingent upon his immediate departure and a non-disclosure agreement. It's a joke, he fumed, throwing his phone across our pristine new living room. After everything I've done for them, they're scapegoating me for decisions the partners made. I watched him from the doorway, struck by how small he suddenly seemed in our cavernous, redesigned space, a space that reflected his tastes, his preferences, his vision of success, but contained almost nothing of me. "What will you do?" I asked quietly. "Fight back, obviously," he snapped, retrieving his phone and checking for damage. "I have options. Harrison at Meridian has been trying to poach me for years. And there's the podcast. I can accelerate that launch, position myself as an independent voice in the industry." He glanced at me, really seeing me for the first time in the conversation. "The gala is off, obviously. I won't give them the satisfaction of watching me make nice after this betrayal." For once, his self-absorption worked in my favor. With James focused entirely on his professional crisis, I was free to attend the VIP preview without explanation or excuse. The night of the exhibition preview, I dressed carefully in my studio at the guest house, selecting a vintage-inspired emerald dress that echoed the style of my grandmother's era. Around my neck, I fastened her thin gold chain with its small, painter's palette charm, a piece I'd found among her belongings that had once seemed merely decorative, but now represented a secret identity preserved through decades of silence. James barely glanced up from his laptop as I prepared to leave. "Meeting Rebecca for dinner," I explained, a half-truth that didn't even register with him. "Fine," he muttered, engrossed in drafting emails to industry contacts. "Don't wait up. I'll be strategizing late." I paused at the door, wondering if this was the moment to finally tell him where I was really going, what I had discovered, what was about to happen. But the memory of his laughter at our anniversary dinner, the casual cruelty of his dismissal, stopped me. This night belonged to my grandmother, to her long-hidden talent, to the legacy that had nearly been lost to history. James had forfeited the right to share in it through years of disregard. "Good luck with your strategy," I said, and left to witness the resurrection of Elise Karsner's artistic legacy. A resurrection James knew nothing about, orchestrated by the wife he had consistently underestimated for over a decade. The contrast between our two trajectories couldn't have been more stark. James's carefully constructed professional identity was crumbling while my newfound purpose flourished. His dismissal of what he didn't value was proving costly in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The Westbrook Gallery's exclusive preview event exceeded every expectation. The space had been transformed into an elegant retrospective that traced my grandmother's artistic journey chronologically, beginning with her early Paris works and culminating with the previously unseen hidden years paintings from our family collection. Catherine Westbrook herself greeted me at the private entrance, her typically reserved demeanor animated with excitement. "Olivia, the response has been extraordinary. 3 museum curators are here, along with collectors from as far as Tokyo and Berlin." Everyone is talking about the discovery. As I entered the main gallery space, I was struck by the sight of my grandmother's paintings displayed with such reverence, professionally lit, perfectly framed, given room to breathe on pristine walls. Seeing them this way, I understood their power in a new light. These weren't just family heirlooms. They were masterworks that told a story of talent, perseverance, and quiet defiance. Ms. Chadwick, a silver-haired woman, approached, extending her hand. "I'm Eleanor Richards from the Modern Art Quarterly. Would you be willing to give me a brief interview about how you discovered your grandmother was Elise Karsner? It's the art world mystery of the decade." Before I could respond, Rebecca appeared at my side, seamlessly intervening. "Ms. Chadwick will be giving a short statement later this evening. For now, she's simply taking in the moment." The evening progressed in a blur of introductions, champagne flutes, and hushed, reverent discussions of brushwork and historical context. I moved through the space in a state of surreal detachment, hearing phrases like groundbreaking discovery and changes our understanding of the period applied to paintings that had hung unremarked in family homes for decades. Near the largest painting, the one that had hung above our fireplace until recently, I overheard a distinguished older gentleman speaking to a small group. "The market for rediscovered female modernists has been exceptionally strong," he was saying. "The Karsner work is particularly significant because it fills a crucial gap in our understanding of the post-war transition. I'd estimate the centerpiece alone could reach well over $1 million at auction." It was one thing to see such figures on paper. It was another entirely to hear them spoken aloud in this rarefied space, surrounded by people who clearly viewed my grandmother's work with the respect it deserved. I thought again of James's dismissive laughter, his casual cruelty in reducing her legacy to family junk. "Olivia," Catherine appeared at my elbow. "The Times art critic is here and specifically asked to meet you. Are you comfortable with that?" I nodded, surprising myself with my growing confidence in this unfamiliar world. Throughout the evening, I found myself sharing my grandmother's story with increasing ease. Her dual identity, her hidden career, the family's ignorance of her significance. I carefully edited out any mention of James, focusing instead on the joy of rediscovering Elise Karsner's legacy. Near the end of the evening, Catherine clinked a glass for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're honored to have with us tonight the woman responsible for bringing these extraordinary works to light, Olivia Chadwick, granddaughter of Elise Karsner." The room's focus shifted to me, dozens of appreciative faces turning in expectation. In that moment, I felt a strange calm settle over me, as though my grandmother's strength had somehow transferred through the generations. "Thank you all for coming tonight," I began, my voice steadier than I'd expected. For most of my life, I knew these paintings simply as my grandmother's work. Beautiful, certainly, but significant primarily for their personal connection. I grew up with them hanging in family homes, unremarkable in their familiarity. I paused, gathering my thoughts. What you see tonight is not just the rediscovery of an important artist, but the reclamation of a woman's rightful place in history. Elise Karsner, my grandmother, chose to hide her light for personal reasons, but she never stopped creating, never stopped evolving as an artist. These later works, never before seen publicly, show us what she continued to achieve in private. The speech continued for a few minutes more, words flowing from some authentic place I rarely accessed. When I finished, the applause was warm and genuine. Critics and collectors approached with cards and contact information. Museum representatives expressed interest in future exhibitions, and Catherine whispered that several serious buyers had already made inquiries about purchase options. It was nearly midnight when I finally left the gallery, my mind spinning with the evening's events. The night air was cool against my flushed skin as I walked to my car, phone in hand to check for messages. There were none from James, not surprising given his absorption in his career crisis, but several from Rebecca, who had left earlier to prepare for an early class. Incredible night, her text read. NYT critics staying to write immediate review. Catherine says multiple offers coming in for main painting. Call me tomorrow. As I drove home, I felt a shifting in my foundations, not just professionally with this unexpected entry into the art world, but personally. The woman who had entered the Westbrook Gallery that evening was not quite the same one driving home. Something fundamental had changed in how I saw myself, my possibilities, my future. Our house was dark when I arrived, but James's car was in the driveway. I entered quietly, assuming he'd finally gone to bed after his long day of strategizing. Instead, I found him in the living room, illuminated only by the blue glow of his laptop screen and a half-empty tumbler of scotch on the side table. "Where have you been?" he asked without looking up, his voice carrying that edge of controlled irritation I knew well. "With Rebecca," I said, the half-truth coming easily. "I told you before I left." "Until midnight?" Now he did look up, his gaze sweeping over my elegant dress and carefully styled hair. "You're dressed for more than dinner." There was an accusation in his tone that caught me off guard. After years of minimal interest in my activities or appearance, he was suddenly paying attention, not out of concern but suspicion. "We went for drinks after," I improvised, unwilling to share the truth of the evening with him. "Not yet. Not like this." James studied me for a moment longer, then returned to his screen. "While you were out enjoying yourself, I've been dealing with the complete implosion of my career. Meridian isn't interested. Apparently, word has spread about the Thornfield situation, and I'm being frozen out." His tone was bitter, the undercurrent of blame unmistakable, as though my absence during his crisis was somehow connected to his professional failures. I felt a familiar response rising within me, the impulse to soothe, to sympathize, to center his feelings above my own. But something had shifted. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said simply, neither taking on his burden nor dismissing it. "What will you do now?" He closed the laptop with a sharp snap. "I'm meeting with a lawyer tomorrow to review my options for suing Thornfield. The podcast launch needs to be accelerated, and we need to consider our finances." The abrupt pivot to our finances sent a warning signal through me. Until now, James had managed our money with minimal input from me, an arrangement he'd established early in our marriage when he'd dismissed my interest in our investments as cute but unnecessary. "What about our finances?" I asked carefully. "We're facing a significant income reduction while I rebuild," he said, his tone shifting to the condescending patience he used when explaining complex matters to me. "The renovation costs were higher than anticipated. We need to reduce expenses immediately and possibly liquidate some assets." "Which assets?" My voice remained steady, but my mind raced ahead, connecting dots I didn't want to acknowledge. "I've been looking at options. Your car is newer than mine, and you barely use it. We have that vacation property in Vermont that sits empty most of the year. And there are the insurance policies." He continued listing possibilities, but I had stopped listening, a cold certainty settling over me. James was constructing a narrative where his career setback necessitated sacrifices, my sacrifices specifically, without consultation or true partnership. The renovation he had insisted upon, the expensive furniture he had selected, the lifestyle he had constructed would remain untouched. It was my possessions, my inheritances that would be liquidated to maintain his vision. "So I've scheduled an appraiser to come tomorrow and assess the Vermont property value, and I've already contacted a dealer about your car," he was saying when I tuned back in. "With careful management, we should be able to maintain the house during this temporary setback." "You did what?" I interrupted, my voice sharper than he was used to hearing. James blinked, surprised by my tone. "I'm being proactive, Olivia. Someone needs to address the practical realities." Those are my assets, I said quietly. The Vermont house was my inheritance from my parents. My car was purchased with money I saved from my design work. You don't have the right to liquidate either without my agreement. A flash of irritation crossed his face. Don't be difficult. We're talking about our shared financial future here. Your little design projects bring in pocket money, not substantial income. My career has always been our primary financial support. And right now, that means making tough decisions. If you're just joining us in this incredible story, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the dramatic conclusion. Your support helps us bring these inspiring real-life journeys to you each week. My little design projects, I repeated slowly, feeling something crystallize within me. Like my grandmother's little painting hobby? He sighed dramatically. Olivia, this isn't the time for sensitivity about terminology. We need practical solutions, not emotional reactions. In that moment, I made a decision. Not impulsively, but with the clarity that comes from seeing a situation without illusion for the first time. James had dismissed my grandmother's art as worthless. He had dismissed my creative work as insignificant. He had dismissed my financial contributions as pocket money. And now, faced with his own professional failure, he was prepared to sacrifice what was mine to preserve what was his, all while expecting my grateful compliance. I won't be home tomorrow, I said, my voice calm despite the hammering of my heart. I have meetings all day that can't be rescheduled. Cancel the appraiser and the car dealer. We'll discuss options when I return. James stared at me, clearly unaccustomed to this direct opposition. What meetings? With whom? Professional contacts, I replied, deliberately vague. About my work. Your work, he repeated skeptically. Your occasional logo designs and business cards are suddenly so pressing they can't be rescheduled during a family financial crisis? I met his gaze steadily. Yes. Without waiting for his response, I turned and headed upstairs, my mind already planning the next day's actions. First, I would meet with my own lawyer, not James's, to understand my legal position regarding our assets. Then I would speak with Catherine about accelerating the timeline for the public announcement of the Karsner exhibition. Finally, I would secure my grandmother's papers and remaining artwork somewhere James couldn't access them. James's voice followed me up the stairs. This isn't like you, Olivia. I need you to be reasonable about this. He was right about one thing. This wasn't like the Olivia he knew. The compliant wife who deferred to his judgment, who accepted his dismissal of her interests and heritage, who placed his needs above her own. That version of me had begun fading the moment I discovered the truth about my grandmother, and tonight she had disappeared entirely. Tomorrow would bring decisions I wasn't yet ready to make about our marriage, our future, and what I truly wanted for myself. But one thing was already certain. I would no longer allow James to determine the value of what was mine, whether paintings, property, or potential. As I changed out of my dress, I could hear James moving around downstairs, making another drink, muttering to himself, the sounds of a man unaccustomed to having his authority questioned. I felt a strange detachment, as though I were observing our marriage from a distance for the first time, seeing clearly the patterns that had defined our relationship for years. I fell asleep that night with thoughts not of James's crisis, but of my grandmother, a woman who had hidden her light to accommodate others' expectations, who had continued creating beauty in private when the world denied her recognition. I wondered what choices she might have made with the options available to me now, with the freedom to define her own value on her own terms. By morning, James had shifted tactics, his initial irritation replaced by conciliatory overtures. Coffee, prepared just as I liked it, solicitous questions about my schedule, carefully casual mentions of discussing options together, rather than decisions already made. I accepted the coffee and returned non-committal responses to his questions. Neither confrontational nor acquiescent. The dynamic between us had shifted, though only I understood how completely. James was operating from the assumption that my resistance was a temporary aberration that could be managed with the right approach. He didn't yet realize that the ground beneath our marriage had fundamentally changed. I left the house with a simple, "I'll call you later," ignoring his reminder about the financial urgency. As I drove away, I glanced back at our renovated home, a perfect showcase for James's taste, his aspirations, his vision of success, and wondered if I would ever again feel it was truly mine. The crisis that had been building silently, 2 days. After the VIP preview, with James still unaware of the Westbrook Gallery exhibition, Catherine called with news that changed everything. "Olivia, I've received a formal offer from the Caldwell Foundation for your grandmother's main painting, the one from your fireplace. They're offering $950,000, which is exceptional for a private sale." I sat down, my legs suddenly unsteady. "That's substantial." "It is," Catherine agreed. "But I wanted to discuss options with you before responding. The publicity from the exhibition opening might drive auction prices even higher. Some collectors are already making inquiries about bidding opportunities." I considered this as I gazed out my office window. The Vermont property. James was so eager. To liquidate had been valued at approximately $380,000 in the last assessment. My pocket money design business generated about $42,000 annually. And here was Catherine casually discussing nearly $1 million for a single painting James had repeatedly called worthless. "What would you recommend?" I asked. "Honestly, I'd recommend we consider auctioning the main piece. With the momentum building around this discovery, we could potentially see it exceed $1.2 million. The 5 smaller works could be split between private sales and institutional acquisitions. Several museums have expressed interest. I made my decision. Let's proceed with auction preparations for the main painting. I'll consult with my lawyer regarding the others." When I hung up, I felt a strange sense of calm. The financial concerns James had weaponized against me had evaporated with a single phone call. More importantly, the value of my grandmother's work, dismissed and devalued for so long, was now being recognized in the most tangible way possible. My meeting with the lawyer that morning had been equally clarifying. The Vermont property and my car were indeed solely mine, protected from James's unilateral decisions. The paintings, as inherited items predating our marriage, were unquestionably my separate property. James had no legal claim to any of it, a fact that shifted the power dynamic of our relationship dramatically. For the first time, I allowed myself to consider options beyond simply protecting my assets. The foundation of our marriage, my deference to James's judgment, my acceptance of his authority in all matters financial and practical, had crumbled. What remained when that foundation was gone? I spent the day making arrangements, securing the remaining paintings in a bank vault James couldn't access, transferring funds to a separate account, and finalizing details for the public opening of the exhibition, now just 3 days away. Throughout, I maintained minimal communication with James, responding to his increasingly urgent texts about our financial planning with brief assurances that I was handling important matters. By evening, I had reached a decision. I would tell James everything, not to seek his approval or validation, but because continuing the deception served no purpose now. Whatever came next, it would be based on truth, not the comfortable fictions that had sustained our marriage for years. I returned home to find James in a state of controlled agitation. He paced our living room, phone in hand, pausing when I entered. "Finally," he said, irritation barely concealed. "I've been trying to reach you all day. The Vermont property appraiser is rescheduled for tomorrow morning, and I need you to cancel." "It," I interrupted calmly. "We won't be selling the Vermont house." James stared at me, clearly struggling to process this direct contradiction. "Olivia, we discussed this. Our financial situation is something we need to discuss properly," I finished for him. Sit down, James. There's something you need to know. Perhaps it was the unusual authority in my tone, or simply curiosity. But James actually complied, sinking onto the sleek leather sofa he'd selected for our renovated living room. I've been working on a project for the past few months, I began, choosing my words carefully. It started when you dismissed my grandmother's paintings as worthless junk. His expression flickered with impatience. Is this really the time to revisit old grievances? We have practical matters. This is extremely practical, I assured him. You remember the painting that hung above our fireplace? The one you wanted to replace with proper art? He glanced at the wall where a large, fashionably abstract canvas now hung, the investment piece he'd selected to showcase our cultural sophistication. What about it? I had it appraised, I said simply, along with 5 other paintings by my grandmother. Something in my tone must have registered, because James's expression shifted subtly from dismissive to attentive. And? My grandmother wasn't just any painter, James. She was Elise Karsner, a significant figure in mid-century modernism who disappeared from the art world in the late 1950s when she married my grandfather. I watched comprehension slowly dawn on his face. The Westbrook Gallery is hosting an exhibition of her rediscovered works, opening to the public this weekend. The VIP preview was the night before last. That's where I was, not having drinks with Rebecca? James stared at me, clearly struggling to reconcile this information with his understanding of our life together. An exhibition? Of your grandmother's paintings? The ones from the attic? Yes, I confirmed. The art world is calling it a major discovery. The Caldwell Foundation has offered $950,000 for the main painting alone, but we're taking it to auction. Instead, estimates suggest it could exceed $1.2 million. The color drained from James's face as the implications registered. His mouth opened and closed several times before he managed, $1 million? The total collection is valued between $3.8 and $4.2 million, I continued, a calm certainty carrying me forward. The worthless family clutter you've been trying to dispose of for years turns out to be quite valuable after all. James stood suddenly, moving to the bar cart to pour himself a drink with unsteady hands. Why didn't you tell me sooner? He demanded, a note of accusation in his voice. All this time, you've been what? Secretly meeting with galleries while I've been dealing with a career crisis? Planning this? This reveal for maximum impact? The unfairness of his response might once have prompted me to apologize, to soothe his wounded pride. Instead, I met his gaze steadily. I didn't tell you because you made it abundantly clear that you considered my grandmother's work worthless. You laughed about it at our anniversary dinner, remember? You dismissed her as a hobby painter with delusions of grandeur. You were ready to throw away paintings worth millions without a second thought. James downed his drink in one swallow, his expression cycling through shock, disbelief, and something that looked surprisingly like betrayal. So all these meetings and professional contacts? Art historians, curators, gallery directors, I confirmed. And my lawyer, as of this morning. Your lawyer? His voice sharpened. What does a lawyer have to do with this? I needed to confirm that the paintings and proceeds from their sale are legally my separate property, I explained. Along with the Vermont house and my car, both of which you were planning to liquidate without my full consent. James set his glass down with exaggerated care. You've been consulting lawyers about our assets behind my back, while I've been trying to manage a financial crisis that affects both of us. A crisis you attempted to solve by sacrificing my property while preserving yours, I pointed out. The renovations you insisted on, the furniture you selected, the lifestyle you constructed, those weren't up for discussion. Only my inheritances, my possessions. We stared at each other across the pristine living room, the physical space between us a perfect metaphor for the emotional distance that had been growing for years. What exactly are you saying, Olivia? James finally asked, his voice carefully controlled. I'm saying that I don't need your permission or approval to make decisions about my grandmother's legacy or my financial future, I replied. I'm saying that our marriage has operated on the assumption that your judgment is superior to mine, your career more significant than my work, your tastes more refined than my preferences, and I'm no longer willing to accept those terms. A charged silence filled the room. In all our years together, I had never spoken to James with such direct challenge to his authority, his perspective, his assumptions about our relationship. And the money? He asked finally, unable to completely mask the calculation behind the question. What are your plans for that? The nakedness of his interest, his immediate pivot to how my grandmother's legacy might benefit him, confirmed what I had already begun to suspect. James valued what I could provide, not who I was. I haven't decided yet, I answered truthfully, but I know it provides options I didn't have before, options that don't depend on your approval or participation. James's expression hardened as he recognized the implicit threat. So that's it? After 10 years of marriage, you're ready to walk away because of some unexpected windfall? Because I didn't properly appreciate your grandmother's hobby? No, James, I said quietly. Not because of the money, or even because you dismissed my grandmother's work. I'm reconsidering our marriage because this situation has shown me how little you value me, my history, my contributions, my autonomy. The money doesn't change that. It simply makes it impossible to ignore. He laughed without humor. This is ridiculous. You're overreacting to a few casual comments about old paintings. I've supported you for a decade, given you a beautiful home, a comfortable lifestyle. That I've contributed to in ways you've consistently minimized, I interjected. My design work isn't pocket money, James. It's a career I've built while accommodating your expectations of what a wife should be. And now that you've discovered you don't need my financial support, those expectations are suddenly intolerable? The bitterness in his voice was palpable. They've been problematic for years, I admitted. I just didn't feel I had the option to challenge them. We lapsed into silence again, the magnitude of the shift between us settling over the room. James recovered first, his natural strategic instincts apparently kicking in as he visibly reorganized his approach. Look, he said, his tone softening, this has been a shock for both of us. You've made an amazing discovery about your grandmother's work, and I should have been more supportive from the beginning. Let's not make any hasty decisions while emotions are running high. I recognized the tactic, the reasonable tone, the small concession, the suggestion that my perspective was emotional rather than rational. It had worked countless times before, diffusing conflicts by positioning James as the calm, logical voice of reason. The exhibition opening is this Saturday, I said, instead of engaging with his attempted redirection. I'll be staying at the hotel adjacent to the gallery for the next few days to assist with final preparations. We can discuss next steps after the opening. James's facade of reasonableness slipped slightly. You're leaving? Now? When we're in the middle of a serious discussion about our future? Yes, I confirmed, already moving toward the stairs to pack an overnight bag. This is a significant moment in my professional life, James. I've committed to being present for it. Professional life, he repeated incredulously. Yesterday, you were a part-time graphic designer. Now you're what? An art historian? A gallery? Curator? I paused on the stairs, looking back at him. I'm the woman who rediscovered Elise Karsner and restored her rightful place in art history, and after Saturday, everyone in the art world will know it. The final 48 hours before the public opening of Elise Karsner: The Hidden Years passed in a whirlwind of activity. I stayed at the hotel near the gallery as planned, immersed in final preparations and preliminary press interviews. Catherine had arranged a careful media strategy that positioned me as the devoted granddaughter who had recognized the significance of a family legacy, rather than the wife whose husband had dismissed that legacy as worthless. The personal elements add human interest, Catherine explained as we reviewed talking points. But we want the focus to remain on Elise and her work, not on marital dynamics. I appreciated her discretion. Though James's dismissal of the paintings had catalyzed my journey of discovery, the exhibition was about my grandmother's talent and contribution to art history, not about my failing marriage. James sent several messages during those 2 days, beginning with indignant demands that I return home to finish our discussion, and gradually shifting to concerned inquiries about my plans, interspersed with reminders of our shared history and suggestions that we approach this new situation as a team. I responded minimally, maintaining boundaries while avoiding outright confrontation. Whatever decisions lay ahead, they would come after the exhibition opening, not before. On Saturday morning, I awoke to news alerts on my phone. The New York Times Arts section featured a prominent article titled, "Lost Modernist Rediscovered: The Secret Life of Elise Karsner." The piece included quotes from leading art historians and a striking image of my grandmother's signature painting, the one from our fireplace, alongside photographs of her in Paris during the 1950s. Similar coverage appeared in other major publications, each emphasizing the extraordinary nature of the discovery and the significance of the works themselves. My name appeared in every article as the granddaughter who had preserved and ultimately revealed Karsner's legacy, though the specifics of how I'd come to investigate the painting's provenance remained deliberately vague. If you're enjoying this remarkable story of rediscovery and vindication, please take a moment to subscribe. Your support means everything to us, and there's much more to come. By mid-morning, Catherine called with updates that exceeded even our most optimistic projections. The gallery line started forming 2 hours before opening, she reported, her typically composed voice vibrating with excitement. We've had to implement timed entry just to manage the crowds. And the auction house called. They've already received inquiries from 3 major collectors and a museum acquisition committee. They're suggesting we consider a special event auction, rather than waiting for the seasonal schedule. I arrived at the gallery shortly before noon to find the scene Catherine had described. A line of eager visitors extending down the block, a media crew filming exterior shots for the evening news, and inside, a steady stream of viewers moving reverently through the exhibition spaces. In the main room, visitors clustered around my grandmother's largest painting, murmuring appreciatively while consulting the exhibition catalog. I stood unnoticed nearby, listening to their observations, their connections to other artists of the period, their wonder at how such significant works could have remained hidden for decades. There she is. Rebecca appeared at my side, dressed elegantly for the occasion. The woman of the hour. Have you seen the coverage? It's extraordinary. I nodded, still processing the rapid transformation of my grandmother's paintings from family clutter to the center of such intense public interest. It's overwhelming, I admitted, in the best possible way. Olivia. Rebecca hesitated, her expression shifting to concern. There's something you should know. James is here. My pulse quickened. Here? Now? He arrived about 20 minutes ago. Catherine recognized him from your description and alerted me. He's in the South Gallery, viewing the smaller works. I took a steadying breath. I should have expected this. The coverage is everywhere this morning. Do you want security to escort him out? Catherine would arrange it discreetly. I considered the option briefly, then shook my head. No, this is a public exhibition. He has as much right to be here as anyone. Rebecca squeezed my arm supportively. I'll stay nearby, just in case. I made my way through the crowded main gallery toward the smaller south room where my grandmother's more intimate works were displayed. As I approached, I could see James standing before a small canvas depicting a Parisian cafe scene, one of the paintings he had nearly discarded during the renovation. He was dressed impeccably as always, his posture rigid with the controlled tension I recognized from high-pressure business situations. I noticed several other visitors giving him a wide berth, perhaps sensing his intensity as he stared at the painting. "James," I said quietly as I approached. He turned, his expression a complex mixture of emotions I couldn't fully decipher. Shock. Certainly. Perhaps anger. Possibly even something approaching respect. "So it's all true," he said, gesturing toward the painting. "Your grandmother was actually this significant artist?" "Yes," I confirmed simply. "And these are really worth millions." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "The valuations have been confirmed by multiple experts and auction houses. The interest this morning has exceeded even their projections." James nodded slowly, his gaze returning to the painting. "It's actually quite powerful. The technique is remarkable." The observation surprised me, not because it wasn't true, but because it represented perhaps the first time James had ever acknowledged the artistic merit of my grandmother's work, rather than dismissing it as decorative sentiment. "Yes, it is," I agreed. We stood in uncomfortable silence for a moment, surrounded by strangers admiring paintings that had once hung unnoticed in family homes, their value unrecognized. "I've been thinking about our conversation," James finally said, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "About what you said regarding how I've treated you, your work, your contributions." I waited, neither encouraging nor discouraging this unexpected direction. "You're right," he continued, the admission clearly difficult for him. "I've been dismissive. Not just about the paintings, but about many things that matter to you. I didn't see it until now, until all this." He gestured around the gallery. "Until you proved me wrong so completely that I couldn't ignore it anymore." The acknowledgement was more than I had expected, but it came with a realization. It had taken external validation, public recognition, financial valuation, media attention, for James to recognize the merit of what had been in front of him for years. He could acknowledge my grandmother's talent now because the art world confirmed it, not because he truly saw it himself. "Thank you for saying that," I replied carefully. "I think we should talk about what this means for us," he continued. "For our future together. This changes everything, Olivia. The financial concerns I had are obviously resolved. We can move forward on entirely different terms." There it was, the pivot to us and our future, now that my grandmother's paintings had proven valuable. The easy assumption that I would fold this new development into our existing relationship structure, perhaps with minor adjustments to acknowledge my unexpected contribution. "James," I began, choosing my words with care. "I meant what I said. Before. This isn't just about the money or even about the paintings themselves. It's about fundamental patterns in our relationship that would still exist, even if these paintings were worthless." His expression tightened slightly. "But they're not worthless. They're worth millions, which changes the entire context of our situation." "It changes our financial circumstances," I corrected gently. "It doesn't change the fact that you consistently devalued what mattered to me until external validation forced you to reconsider." A muscle worked in his jaw as he processed this rejection of his framing. "So that's it? 10 years of marriage and you're walking away because I didn't appreciate some paintings?" "No," I said, maintaining my calm despite his deliberate oversimplification. "I'm reconsidering our relationship because discovering the truth about these paintings revealed fundamental truths about us as well. Truths I can't unsee now that I've recognized them." Around us, gallery visitors continued their quiet appreciation of my grandmother's work, oblivious to the personal drama unfolding in their midst. The public setting imposed a restraint on both of us that was perhaps beneficial. Emotions contained, voices modulated, appearances maintained. "What truths?" James asked, his tone carefully controlled. "That you only value what others confirm is valuable." That you dismissed my judgment until external validation proved it correct. That you saw my inheritance as disposable, but your career as sacrosanct. Each point landed with visible impact, though James maintained his composed exterior. People make mistakes, Olivia, he said after a moment. I made a significant error in judgment about the paintings. I acknowledge that. But throwing away a decade-long marriage over one misjudgment seems extreme. It wasn't one misjudgment, I replied softly. It was a pattern of dismissal that extended to every area of our life together. The paintings just made that pattern impossible to ignore any longer. Before James could respond, Catherine appeared at my elbow, her expression apologetic at the interruption. I'm so sorry, Olivia, but the Times photographer is ready for the arranged portrait by the main painting, and the curator from the Whitney has specific questions about provenance that only you can answer. I nodded, grateful for the timely intervention. I'll be right there. Catherine withdrew discreetly, leaving James and me to conclude our conversation. I have responsibilities here, I told him. We can continue this discussion another time. When? He asked, an edge of demand in his voice. I'll be staying at the hotel through Tuesday, I replied. The exhibition events run through the weekend, and I have meetings with the auction house on Monday. We can speak after that. James studied me for a long moment, seeming to fully register the shift in our dynamic, the reversal of who set the terms, who waited for the other's convenience, who accommodated whose schedule. Fine, he finally said, his tone revealing the effort required to accept this new reality. Tuesday. But Olivia, don't make any irreversible decisions before then. There's a way forward for us that acknowledges both your grandmother's legacy and our history together. I neither agreed nor disagreed, simply nodding acknowledgement of his request before turning toward the main gallery where professional obligations awaited me. The remainder of the opening day passed in a blur of interviews, guided tours, and conversations with art world figures who now viewed me not just as the fortunate granddaughter of Elise Karsner, but as the perceptive individual who had recognized and preserved an important artistic legacy. Your insight into the historical significance of these works is remarkable, commented the Whitney curator, as we discussed potential inclusion of several paintings in their upcoming retrospective. Especially given that you don't have formal art historical training. I had excellent guidance, I acknowledged, gesturing to where Rebecca was speaking with a group of students. But I also had the advantage of growing up with these paintings, absorbing their power long before I understood their significance. By evening, when the gallery finally closed to the public, the exhibition had broken attendance records for an opening day. The guest book overflowed with comments from visitors moved by both the artwork itself and the story of its rediscovery. Sales of the exhibition catalog had exceeded the initial print run, necessitating an immediate reorder. And most significantly, the auction house had confirmed their recommendation for a special event auction, suggesting a date just 3 weeks away to capitalize on the extraordinary public interest. Conservatively, the main painting should bring between 1.2 and 1.5 million, Catherine informed me as we shared a quiet dinner after closing. The smaller works, if sold separately, could add another 2.8 to 3.2 million to the total. Of course, there's always the possibility of unexpected competitive bidding driving prices even higher. I nodded, still adjusting to the reality of these figures attached to paintings I had grown up seeing on family walls. And the museum interest? Strong, but complicated, Catherine acknowledged. Institutions move more slowly than private collectors, especially with acquisition budgets. The Whitney is most likely to make a competitive offer, given their focus on American women artists. They've requested first option on the cafe scene piece. We continued discussing logistics and opportunities well into the evening. Potential. Traveling exhibitions, scholarly publications, documentary interest. Throughout, I felt a growing confidence in my instincts and decisions, a sharp contrast to the self-doubt James had subtly but consistently cultivated over the years of our marriage. Returning to my hotel room that night, I found several messages from James, each more carefully composed than his initial reactions had been. He congratulated me on the exhibition's success, acknowledged the significance of my grandmother's work, and expressed hope for a collaborative path forward that honors both this extraordinary legacy and our shared life. The messages were perfectly calibrated to appear supportive while still assuming a future together. A linguistic sleight of hand that I might not have recognized before these recent events had heightened my awareness of such patterns. I responded with a brief but polite message confirming our Tuesday meeting and nothing more. Whatever decision I ultimately made about our marriage would come from clarity, not obligation or habit. The woman who had rediscovered Elise Karsner would not be rushed or manipulated into choices that didn't serve her own best interests. Sunday and Monday brought continued public and critical acclaim for the exhibition. Art forums buzzed with discussion of Karsner's unique technique and historical significance. Academic journals requested articles on the discovery process and its implications for understanding mid-century women artists. Catherine fielded inquiries from galleries in London, Paris, and Tokyo about hosting the collection after its New York run. Through it all, I found myself increasingly comfortable in this new role, not just as Elise Karsner's granddaughter, but as a legitimate voice in conversations about her work and legacy. The respect accorded my insights, my decisions, my perspective, was a marked contrast to the dynamic that had defined my marriage for a decade. By Tuesday morning, when I checked out of the hotel and prepared to meet James at a neutral location, a quiet restaurant halfway between the gallery and our home, I had reached a decision about our future. It wasn't based on anger or vindication, but on the clear-eyed recognition of what I wanted and deserved in a partnership. 3 months after the Westbrook Gallery opening, I stood in the auction house's grand hall, watching as my grandmother's signature painting took center stage. The auctioneer's voice filled the packed room, numbers climbing higher with each confident bid. $1 million, he announced, scanning the crowd for the next offer. Do I hear 1,100,000? A paddle raised near the back. Another followed almost immediately from the phone bidding section. 1,200,000, the auctioneer continued, his practiced tone revealing nothing of the exceptional nature of these figures for a previously unknown artist. 1,300,000 from the gentleman on the phone. I watched with a sense of surreal detachment as the bidding continued to climb, finally settling at $1,750,000, significantly exceeding even the most optimistic projections. The crowd applauded as the gavel fell, marking not just a sale, but a validation of my grandmother's place in art history. From my seat in the front row, I could see James at the back of the hall, his expression a complex mixture of awe and regret. He had asked to attend, and I had agreed, not from any lingering sense of obligation, but because there was a kind of poetic completion in his witnessing this final vindication of what he had once dismissed so carelessly. Our conversation that Tuesday, 3 months earlier, had been surprisingly anticlimactic. The restaurant I'd chosen was quiet, elegant without being intimidating, its neutral territory perfectly suited to the discussion we needed to have. You look well, James had observed as I joined him at the table, a hint of surprise in his tone, as though my obvious thriving in his absence somehow contradicted his expectations. Thank you, I replied simply. The past few days have been extraordinary. He nodded, adjusting his approach to this new version of me. Confident, composed, no longer seeking his approval or validation. I've been thinking a lot about what you said at the gallery, he began after we'd ordered, about patterns in our relationship. I recognize now that I've been dismissive of things that matter to you. Not just the paintings, but your work, your preferences, your judgment. The acknowledgement seemed genuine, though it had taken extraordinary external circumstances to prompt it. I appreciate you saying that, I said, meaning it. I want us to start fresh, he continued, the familiar strategic tone creeping into his voice. This discovery changes everything, Olivia. Not just financially, but in terms of how we relate to each other. I see now what you're capable of. The insight, the determination. We can build something new together. Something equal. I studied him across the table, noting the careful calibration of his approach. James was nothing if not adaptable. The facts had changed, so his strategy had changed, shifting from dismissal to respect once the external value of my contribution had been established beyond question. James, I said gently, I've made a decision about our future. I'd like a separation, leading to divorce. The words hung between us, simple but irrevocable. His expression flickered through surprise, calculation, and finally a composed mask of regretful acceptance. Is that really what you want? He asked. After 10 years together? One mistake. It wasn't one mistake, I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. It was a fundamental dynamic that shaped our entire relationship. You valued me conditionally, when I conformed to your expectations, when I supported your goals, when I accepted your judgment as superior to mine. That dynamic can't be healthy for either of us moving forward. James leaned forward, his tone shifting to one of reasonable persuasion. People grow, Olivia. Relationships evolve. What happened with your grandmother's paintings was a wake-up call for me. I see you differently now. Yes, I agreed. You see me differently because external validation forced you to reevaluate. But that's not the foundation I want for the next chapter of my life. We talked for nearly 2 hours, covering practical considerations, emotional terrain, and the logistics of untangling a decade of shared life. Throughout, I maintained a gentle but unwavering clarity about my decision. This wasn't about punishment or even vindication. It was about recognizing what I needed and deserved in a partnership, what I was no longer willing to accept. In the weeks that followed, we navigated the separation with surprising civility. James, ever conscious of appearances, seemed determined to manage the dissolution of our marriage with the same polished competence he brought to business transactions. I found I preferred this approach to drawn-out emotional battles, allowing us to efficiently address the division of assets, the sale of our renovated home, and the official filing of divorce papers. The auction of my grandmother's paintings proceeded on a parallel track, with each piece finding its way to appreciative new owners. The Whitney Museum acquired 2 works for their permanent collection. A European collector purchased 3 of the smaller paintings for his private gallery. And the signature piece, the one that had hung above our fireplace for years, went to the auction that I now watched conclude with such spectacular results. If this story has inspired you, please hit that subscribe button and share it with others who might need to hear this message of rediscovery and valuing yourself. As the auction crowd began to disperse, I made my way toward the exit, nodding acknowledgement to various art world figures I'd come to know over these transformative months. James intercepted me near the door, maintaining a respectful distance that reflected our new reality. Congratulations, he said, his tone carefully modulated. It's an extraordinary outcome. Your grandmother would be proud. Thank you, I replied simply. And the divorce papers? He asked, shifting to practical matters. My lawyer says everything is in order for the final signing next week. I nodded. Yes, I've reviewed everything with my attorney. The terms are fair to both of us. An awkward silence fell between us, former partners now navigating the strange terrain of almost strangers. After a moment, James spoke again, his voice quieter than before. I was wrong about the paintings, he acknowledged, but I was wrong about you too, Olivia. I never saw what you were capable of until it was too late. There was genuine regret in his expression, perhaps even a dawning understanding of what he had lost through years of dismissal and devaluation. For a moment, I felt a flicker of what might have been. If he had seen me clearly from the beginning, if I had demanded that recognition rather than accommodating its absence. If we had built a partnership based on mutual respect rather than assumed authority. We both deserved more from our marriage, I said finally. I hope you find that in whatever comes next. And you? He asked. What comes next for you? It was a fair question, one I had been considering deeply in recent months. The financial freedom provided by my grandmother's legacy had opened possibilities I'd never imagined during my years as James's wife. But more significant than the money was the confidence I'd discovered, the trust in my own judgment, perception, and value that had emerged through this extraordinary journey. I'm establishing a foundation in my grandmother's name, I told him. It will support women artists who face the same barriers she encountered, especially those who've had to set aside their creative work for family obligations. James nodded, seeming to genuinely appreciate the symmetry of this choice. And personally? He pressed. Will you stay in New York? For now, I confirmed. I've purchased an apartment near the Arts District, and I've accepted Catherine's offer to join the Westbrook Gallery as a special consultant on overlooked women artists. It turns out my experience with my grandmother's work has given me a perspective they value. The irony wasn't lost on either of us, that the very talents and insights James had dismissed were now recognized and sought after by respected institutions and individuals. External validation had simply confirmed what should have been acknowledged all along. We said our goodbyes with the polite distance of former spouses who had found a way to conclude their relationship with dignity, if not warmth. As I watched James walk away, disappearing into the crowded Manhattan street, I felt not regret. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.